We're going to pull up the agenda here in a moment. And, but just to kind of highlight, we're going to start off. Josh is going to be talking a little bit about the land board meeting that recently happened, and also just give a general update with regard to the work of the program and the progress so far. And following that, Dorothy is going to be giving a presentation on assessing vessels of concern and how DSL assesses vessels moving forward. And we'll follow that with a little bit of discussion about how different vessels are ranked in terms of taking action, and get some thoughts from you folks on that. And following that, we will have Josh is going to talk a little bit about some of the expenditures and resources that are allocated to the program. And we're going to talk a little bit about how those funds get allocated, and get some of your initial thoughts in terms of some of the considerations and the priorities for those monies moving forward. And then following that, we'd like to get your input again with regard to the monies. So, and we will have time to talk a little bit about community engagement going forward, since this is the last meeting. We want to talk about your thoughts with regard to how the community and stakeholders should be involved in this program going forward. And we will have time for community input at the end, as we always do. So, so if we go to the next slide. So as always, we have the contact information for Kate and myself. And then just talking again about your participation for the work group members, talking about your participation. So since we are in a hybrid meeting, we're going to do this a couple of different ways. For those of you that are on cyberspace or online, just do as you do with the other meetings that we have, and raise your hand using the hand feature of Zoom. But for those of you who are in person, since you don't have the virtual hand to raise, just turn your name tent on its end, and I'll call on you at that point. And I will take people in the order that they raise their hand or they put their name tent up, except for DSL staff, which DSL staff may be responding to some of the things that are being said. So we want to make sure DSL staff gets a chance to weigh in at that point. And when you chime in, so to speak, please give your name and your organization. So those of you who might be here in the room or online who may not know who you are, know who's talking. So, so with that, I think what we're going to do is we're going to turn over to Josh to talk about State Land Board and the program.
Sure, Eric. Thank you. First, as always, a thank you to those willing to participate today. Both to those that are able to join us here in person in Salem, but also those that join virtually. I appreciate some of the conversation that we were able to have over sandwiches earlier about, not limited to, ADVs. Because this is our last meeting, I wanted to allow the group some extended time for some more open-ended discussion, for us to all talk about program implementation, developing priorities, how and where to engage the interested stakeholder community going forward. And the back half of this meeting today reflects that desire. Also, and here close to the beginning of the meeting, my colleague Dorothy Deal is going to provide a brief look into the considerations that we, DSL, are taking into account to inform our decisions that are the greatest concern to us. Before we dive into that, though, I wanted to provide an update on the program framework that was provided to the land board last week. Um, Number one, that meeting went well. I can confidently say that the program, and therefore much of the work that we did and you all participated with, was accepted and supported. And my single takeaway from the whole experience was an acknowledgement. There's a lot of work ahead of us, so kind of get to it. I think it's a validation of the process that we've gone through to this point. And there was broad acknowledgement among not only land board members, but other lawmakers that the state must direct continued focus to the problem of ADVs. And that we all certainly know that we're not at the finish line. If anything, we're kind of getting our feet into the starting blocks. But there has been and continues to be a sense of optimism around this process, around the early stages of this program. And I feel pretty good about that. I also think it's appropriate to take some time today to reflect on where we've come since the first time that we all met as a group in September, where we had a meeting that really set the stage for the work group and the charge given to the work group. We covered heavy, complicated topic after heavy, complicated topic at those meetings on a biweekly basis in October through December, which is not a long period of time. I mean, truly, that was a lot of work in less than 3 months. All of that discussion on inventorying boats, prevention of ADVs, contracting, all of that informed the framework that we then reviewed in January and sought comment on through February. And all that work and those discussions set the stage for the legislative concept discussion that we had in March as we identified things that may need legislative solutions. So I know that this process has maybe felt slow at times to some of you, redundant potentially. I look back at a lot of positive, sometimes hard conversations with this group, and I can truly say that I think it's yielded and will continue to yield some positive results for the people of Oregon. Before I set the stage for Dorothy's remarks today, I'd like to hand the mic, so to speak, to DSL Deputy Director Bill Ryan, who I'm glad could join us today. I appreciate that, Deputy Director. So go ahead for some remarks.
Thanks for that, Josh. Hopefully everybody can hear me well with that microphone there. So just wanted to say thank you to everybody that's been engaged in this effort and the working group members, from myself and from Director Walker and from the department as a whole. I think, we all agree that Oregon's waterways are worthy and in need of protection, and that addressing the problem of abandoned derelict vessels is something that's critical to providing that kind of protection. This group was charged by the land board and the legislature to help DSL to establish a working group and develop a policy framework to comprehensively address ADVs. And we've accomplished that mission and that charge in terms of putting together the policy framework. So congratulations. I hope you guys feel a sense of accomplishment associated with that. I certainly do. And I'm really proud of the efforts that my staff and the working group have done to actually get this framework in place. You're all aware that the problem of abandoned derelict vessels is not a new problem. It's one that's been going on for quite some time, but it really kind of hit ahead with the global cleanup near Rainier several years ago now. But really, that was the incentive. I forget who it was that said it. Was probably Churchill. He said everything, don't let a crisis go to waste. And so that was a really good example of not letting that $12 million crisis go to waste, and getting the kind of head of steam that you need to get good work done, and especially when you're dealing with the legislature. And Josh mentioned that things might seem a little slow, but anything that's a big project and a big program, a big effort that's going to take significant expenditure, it takes multiple years to get a head of steam to actually get the kind of legislative support that you need to make progress. And we've done that, and we've been able to do that and continue that progress because of your guys' help. So thank you very much to all of you for that. And that being said, this is our 10th and final meeting of this particular working group to put together the framework, but there's still a ton of work to do. As Josh said, we're just in the starting blocks now. Now we're going to start running. developing that program, doing the legislative fixes that need to happen, the program funding sources that need to get identified and tapped into, the rulemaking that will need to happen. There's a bunch of work to happen still. And so we're looking for your folks' support and engagement to the extent that you can as we engage in these processes. And of course, all that work is because we are state government, and this is a good thing, all that work is going to be done in a public process venue, whether it's rulemaking or legislative process or others. So look for more to come. And once again, really appreciate your guys' support to this point and your ongoing support as we have set up this program and then implement this program and hopefully really address the ADV problem. I don't think they're ever going to go away, but I think we can really get it to a manageable level if we can clean up the existing ADVs and really address that pipeline of new ADVs coming down the pike. So it'll just be sort of a chronic condition and not a periodically acute condition, which is what it is now. So thank you again, and just really appreciate all your efforts.
Thank you, Deputy Director. I think I speak on behalf of everyone in this room that we appreciate the support and also sharing the optimism of where we can go going forward and what we can achieve. So I mentioned earlier that we covered a lot of heavy topics during our meetings together in the fall. And two of those were in regards to vessel ranking and reporting, and also the allocation of available funds and prioritizing different potential aspects of the program. You'll recall us identifying a whole lot of things that the ideal program would contain. We think this last meeting is a good time to kind of, compare all those and see where the short-term and maybe long-term priorities are with a finite amount of resources that, may grow over time. So that's the back half of the meeting. When we had the discussions on ranking and reporting in the fall, some of those were relatively hypothetical in nature. Now it seems like a good time to have that discussion again regarding that ranking and comparing of vessels in a more applied and less theoretical sense. So I'm going to hand it off to Dorothy to give you insight into how, from the DSL perspective, and understand that is a perspective and that is a department with management obligations, that we're beginning to evaluate ADVs and other vessels of considerable concern that we know about. With that, Dorothy, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. My name is Dorothy Deal. I'm a project manager in the Waterway Stewardship Program here at DSL. And for those of you that have been involved in the work group, you may have noticed that when the work group started, I was representing the Marine Board and then transitioned to working for DSL about halfway through. Which has been really interesting for me to be able to look at this problem from a different perspective. Because it's really emphasized to me that even though we're all talking about the same problem and I'm still the same person that I was, we really do all have different perspectives, and we should have different perspectives. We have different objectives and obligations based on who we're representing, what we've been charged to protect. And so it's just really emphasized that for me. So what I'm going to show you today tries to incorporate a lot of those different perspectives, but then I'll also need to highlight some areas where maybe DSL's perspective is kind of unique amongst those in this room. Throughout all of the stakeholder engagement that we've done, the work group, the interviews that Kate conducted, I think everyone has agreed that we need a system to evaluate ADVs to determine their significance in the context of the entire state and everything that's out there. And there's several reasons why that's necessary, and they don't all have to do with money. Even if funding for vessel removals was totally unlimited, there are still some other necessary components that are limited that get overlooked. And so some of those things are the number of ADV cases that staff can investigate and respond to at one time, how many contracts can be executed and properly monitored, how much time the Department of Justice can dedicate to assisting us with legal questions and processes, which we've been leaning on them a lot lately in figuring out some of this. How much time our partner agencies like OSMB, DEQ, Coast Guard, law enforcement can dedicate, And then also right now, how many vendors and facilities are available to do vessel removal and deconstruction work at any given time? And also, so one thing I know from all of my past ADV work at OSMB and then also coming here is if we don't have a system for evaluating the proper level of concern for each boat, then we're always going to default to focusing on the one that was most recently reported. So we've attempted to create a methodology here that's well-rounded and isn't so reactive and pulls together all of those perspectives and can be applied across the state. So if we'll go to the next slide. So this slide lists out the 6 main considerations that we're proposing to determine our level of concern about a vessel. So we plan to rate each vessel based on its environmental threat, its community impact rating, volatility rating, nuisance level, and then some existing compounding factors. So I'll go over all of those in more detail. And then I'll wrap up by trying to explain the specific considerations that are unique to DSL. So we'll go to the environmental threat rating. So this one relies heavily on the expertise of other agencies and processes that they've already established for quantifying and understanding environmental threat and responding to threats of pollution. So one of the questions that we might find valuable in asking about a boat is simply, has a pollution response agency such as DEQ investigated this boat? Every agency has limits on their capacity. And so if someone like DEQ is investing time and resources and staff into looking at a boat, then it's probably a boat that I should be interested into. It's the same with the Coast Guard and the National Response Center. If issues are being formally reported about a boat and agencies are looking into it, then obviously that's a clue, and we can't ignore that. And then the last thing shown on this slide, which you can't see it at all, I'm sorry. It's a map overlay showing essential salmonid habitat, which is generated in partnership with Fish and Wildlife. And so we can easily look at, does our vessel of concern overlap with that area? So those 3 things on the slide obviously don't represent even close to everything that should be considered when you're looking at environmental threat. But what they do represent is information that is available. So it's a lot harder to go out and quantify the volume of materials, the nature of materials that might be on a boat, and then determine the precise level of risk associated with that. So what we're trying to do here is answer the questions that can be answered for all of the boats. So in the beginning stages, we're just kind of scanning for symptoms of a problem. We're not fully investigating and diagnosing and treating every boat, which is another reason why we want to pull together all of these different perspectives and look at the problem from the different angles. So the next slide goes to our community impact rating. So this one does not necessarily depend on the individual characteristics of the boat itself. It looks at the impact or the potential impact in light of where that boat is. Because the same boat in a different location might not be as concerning. And this is an example of that. So this is just a 40-foot fiberglass cabin cruiser, which amongst vessels of concern on the Columbia River is not really terribly special. But this one happens to have run aground in an area that is special to the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde. And so they're pretty concerned about damage that this boat could do to cultural resources. And so this boat actually is one of the more concerning boats that we've been responding to lately. And the next one is our volatility rating. So the definition on the slide is the instability of a vessel's situation and the tendency for it to change for the worse. So a vessel's situation could be its position in the water, its status as a floating vessel, but it's a lot more than that. We're trying to find just hints and context clues and red flags to basically determine like how much anxiety should we have about this boat. Some of the things that should make us nervous about a boat include if it just showed up or it's moved unexpectedly. If it's been sitting around for a long time, but then we notice that it has a little bit more of a list or there's a little less freeboard overall. If it looks like the keel touches bottom at low water, if it drags its anchor, it's inappropriately moored. I'll show some examples of that. If a vessel has sank or gone adrift before, even if it has been resolved, that's something that we should keep in mind. It tends to become a pattern. And if something has changed about the owner's situation that causes them to not be able to take care of it anymore, whether they died or they've become ill or they've recently become insolvent or whatever reason, they're not going to be, as capable anymore. If the vessel requires excessive attention to keep the bilges dry, there's vandalism, there's trespassing, or you're seeing deterioration year to year and never any improvements. Or if you were already worried about a vessel for all of these reasons, and then suddenly you find out that it's for sale. And I show a couple examples of volatile vessels on the slide here. The photo at the top, its situation has actually changed a little bit since I made this slide. So this is the Dredge Anderson in Rainier, Oregon. I think it's about 100 feet long. It's covered in real flaky lead paint and there's, it's greasy and rusty and there's terrible stuff on it. Up until just this last week, it was only secured by two like skinny little mooring lines that I don't really know what they went to. It was like rotten piles or something. And then just one spud in the back holding the stern. And so there's concern that if those broke, it can, spin all the way around on that spud. DSL has actually had a contractor go out and secure this one a little bit better because of how volatile it was. And then I don't know, you can't see in the picture, maybe if you squint, but at any given time, there's like several thousand pounds of sea lions weighing down this boat and they don't always like spread out evenly. So that's another volatility consideration for this one. The photo on the bottom is the El Conquistador in Coos Bay. That's 140-foot, great big passenger vessel converted from a tugboat. This one is also moored to derelict pilings that are not authorized to be on state lands. Hasn't moved in years and years. It needs constant supervision to stay secure and afloat. It has no shore power and also no shore access. And it has a history of moving around unexpectedly when it's not really supposed to. And it's even run aground once or twice. And then a couple of weeks ago, it showed up for sale on Facebook Marketplace. So now we'll go to the nuisance rating. So this is where we attempt to quantify the impact that a vessel has on things like livability, recreation, and the ability of management agencies and enforcement agencies to fulfill their duties without the vessel imposing an outsized disproportionate drain on resources and time. So a vessel that would receive a high nuisance rating could be one that agencies are receiving frequent reports from concerned citizens. One that's always generating calls to law enforcement for real or perceived criminal activity, drug activity, trespassing, offensive graffiti, vandalism, and other mischief. One that is highly accessible to the public in a way that creates a hazard. Also, a vessel that is super visible in a way that gives the impression that the management and enforcement agencies are just indifferent to this vessel and the associated behaviors. We know that large derelict vessels often become dumping grounds for smaller vessels, as well as trash and other items. So all of these things in total would contribute to a high nuisance rating for a vessel. And I think all of those and more were true of the Alert and Saccharissa that you can see in this picture. So these were two ex-military vessels that became derelict and abandoned in the Columbia River for years. And through a bunch of folks coming together, those actually were able to come out before my time here at DSL. But I don't think anyone who was involved with those vessels would argue that those weren't a nuisance in every sense. So then we'll move on to the compounding factors. So this is where we get to take into account all of the weird stuff that we learn about a boat that makes it more complicated. So these are things that might not mean much on their own, but in the context of all of those other factors, you add these compounding factors and they add another layer of concern. So there are several examples represented on the slide that all have to do with the El Conquistador. The first one being that it is too large for most of the local accommodations. I said before, it's 140 feet long, 435 gross tons. And that obviously limits where it can moor, where it can come out of the water for maintenance, which hasn't happened in the time that this person has owned it. It also limits, or it affects how much it costs to maintain the boat, and it affects who is even qualified to operate the boat and try to take care of the boat. It also happens to be under captain of the port orders not to move until it's properly documented, which hasn't happened in the 20 years since the current owner has had it. And when a big commercial boat like this can't move, it can't make money and it can't be maintained. And it's also never been documented, which means it can't do business. And it's also going to be really difficult to try to sell that boat to a responsible person who can actually take it and do something with it if there's a break in that documentation. It's also close to 90 years old, which doesn't automatically make it junk. And I found out that its sister ship, the Abitibi, is actually operating right now in Canada as a commercial vessel. So it is possible. But there's a reason why that is rare and why it's surprising to hear that its sister ship is doing that. So I think it's pretty fair to consider the age of a vessel as a compounding factor, especially if the age and the condition of the boat make it harder to insure. And then another compounding factor that would make me cringe personally, and this is not related to El Conquistador, but anytime I hear about somebody talking about an old boat that they want to rescue or save, as soon as I hear somebody say they want to turn it into a museum ship, they're going to fundraise for its restoration. I remember all of the boats that started that way and didn't turn out well. And so we ended up with things like Alert and Saccharissa, the LST, which is like a practically 400-foot long military vessel that's not going anywhere. The Tourist 2 in Clatsop County that sank and cost a couple $1 million to deal with. And then the Denali, a wooden boat that we were talking about earlier. All of those have that in common. So it's a little bit cynical to hear about big dreams and plans for a boat and consider that a compounding factor, but I think it's responsible to be a little bit cynical there. So if we can go to the next slide. So in addition to all the factors I just described, which I think probably align with things that most people would consider concerning about a boat, when it's the Department of State Lands that's looking at a vessel and determining how worried we are, we also need to look at how it's interfering with our ability as a management agency to fulfill our obligations. So DSL is obligated to manage Oregon-owned waterways for the public interest of navigation, fishery, commerce, and recreation. So HB 2914, the bill that established this ADV program, emphasized that in the bill language when it directed DSL to address ADVs to ensure that state-owned waterways are managed for those specific public interests. The department is also compelled by statute to investigate trespasses against the state. So that means looking at whether a vessel is in an area that the department has leased to another entity to manage, or if that vessel is in trespass. And I want to emphasize that trespasses against the state are not just trespasses against DSL, they're trespasses against all Oregonians, because the department manages the submerged lands on behalf of the public. And so we're obligated to make strategic decisions for the benefit of the public at large. So that kind of wraps up the overall considerations that we think should go into determining the relative significance of a boat. So the rank that is assigned through this process is just an overall general level of concern about a boat. It doesn't dictate or prescribe specific follow-up actions, and it doesn't create a schedule or an order for salvage procurement. So the response that would happen, once a vessel is known about and ranked, it could include things like outreach and enforcement, technical assistance, partnerships, applying for grants, which we plan to do a lot of, possibly encouraging vessel surrender, or in some cases, actually seizing a vessel and disposing of it. So, obviously, I have more specifics on all of this in my head and possibly in notes and stuff, but I don't know what all of your specific questions might be. So I'm pretty interested in your reaction to all of that and what questions you might have.
Yeah, so I think that was my cue.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so the first thing we'd like to do at this point is just have, if you have some clarification questions first, and then we'd like to get into some of your perceptions with regard to the rankings that Dorothy put together. So Sergeant.
Sergeant Steve Dangler, Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. Thank you, Dorothy. On the number 1 bullet point, we talked about that assessment possibly done by other agencies for like DEQ and that type of stuff. Is there something that we can do and relinquish some of that responsibility on those that are out on those waterways each and every day, like our county sheriffs, that can kind of make that assessment? I'm more so talking about some of our smaller craft, not some of the larger stuff that obviously we got to look at, lead and asbestos and things of that nature. But can that responsibility lie on the deputies to make some of that determination?
Well, I think that the on the water response agencies would definitely have information that would be incredibly valuable in looking at the rank and environmental threat. Sorry. I don't see it so much as a responsibility for an agency to go out and do those assessments. It's more just a passive, did an agency notice something? Like, was there something that got your attention? Was there a 911 call or an NRC call or something that got routed to fire or got routed to sheriff's office? And just the fact that it did is kind of what gets my attention. And so it's definitely not about going out with like a checklist and looking for certain things. But if we find out that, an oil sheen was reported and you guys responded and, it was a big scene, then that just kind of, is a red flag for us, I would say.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Abby?
Yeah, thank you. And I can't really tell who I'm talking to because I can't see who's in the room, so just comment for future reference. But to the topic, on the environmental threat rating, I first have a question and then a comment. The question, is this intended to be sort of the rating system for like now and the amount of money that you have? Or is this what you're talking about for the kind of to build into the legislation or the future process?
Okay.
And then I have a comment after that.
Okay, I can only remember so much, so I'll try to address your question. So what I'm trying really hard to do in, kind of guiding the development of a ranking system is I'm not really thinking about money. I'm just thinking about the significance of a vessel in the context of all of the other vessels that we know about. So a vessel can't really get a score if it's the only one that we're concerned about. We have to be able to compare it. And so I'm trying to develop a system that can be used everywhere in the state for all of the boats that we're concerned about, just to give us a sense of how worried are we. And that's going to help with communicating to the legislature and probably communicating about money. But it's not, and I mean, your question about, is this for right now? I would say absolutely. I expect it to evolve. It's, it's what we're starting out with. And then as we discover other things, other pieces of information, like the map layer that I described, things like that are available to help us answer questions, then that ranking system will be dynamic.
Okay, I think that helps. And then, so based on that, I would respond and say, I think we have to consider, or that you should consider in the legislative concept if something like this needs to get built in, or this will be something that's done outside of legislation and evolves, or you write rules, or however you mean to move that forward. And then my comment is specific to that environmental threat. The passiveness and is what concerns me. DEQ doesn't, like, just in the example of my agency, and sorry if I didn't say Abby Badur's DEQ, that we don't have funding or staff to be in any way systematic, or frankly have money or staff to really be doing this at all. So if this is an important part, whether it's DEQ doing it or partner agencies like we just heard, I think somehow building something less passive and more systemic and active would be my recommendation.
Okay, I think for now, what we're trying to do is just come up with not an automated system, but something where we can rank everything we know about without a systematic go out and learn everything we can about the boat. It's just a place to start. And as we learn more about each boat, we might get more or less concerned. And then as we learn about other boats, that might change how concerned we are about the one that we started looking at. But I think that it is your lack of capacity to systematically go out and evaluate every boat that makes it that much more concerning when DEQ is excited about one. And so that's why I'm just saying that that's like a hint. Like if DEQ staff are investing time in going out and being concerned about the LST, or they're concerned about the El Conquistador, all that does is kind of, clue me in that, like, I should probably be a little bit worried about this one. And since it's not just the environmental threat that we're looking at all of these other pieces, then I'm hoping when all of those things come together, we end up with something that is pretty consistent and comparable. So that's my goal and what I'm, hoping this exercise accomplishes.
Right. Thank you, Dorothy and Abby. All right. And going back to your point during your presentation, talking about the environmental, the environmental component or factor, you rely pretty heavily on other agencies to kind of help raise that banner, correct?
Yeah, and what other agencies have already established in terms of reporting, like the National Response Center, people call in to that number anytime they see a sheen on the water. They shouldn't call me, they should call NRC. And so if NRC is hearing about a sheen on the water and I know that, then, that makes me worried about that situation.
Thank you. Okay, Troy.
Hello, everyone. Sorry I couldn't make it in person at court, unfortunately. Great presentation, Dorothy. I appreciate that.
Troy, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sorry. Troy Wood from the Department of Natural Resources, the Derelict Vessel Removal Program in Washington State. So, again, Dorothy, great job. I would recommend when you go to the legislature that you might have a goal in mind for the criteria and stuff like that, but just ask them to pass laws saying that your department is required to come up with this criteria and share it publicly on a website or something like that. And that allows you the opportunity to change it in the future if you need to, and make it more robust or adaptable for any changes in your program in the future. So you don't have to go back to the legislature and change it in statute every time you want to make an improvement. But yeah, I think you guys are on the right track for Oregon, obviously.
Cool. Thank you, Troy.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm looking for name, tense, and hands. Stephanie?
Hi, everybody. Stephanie Rawson with Metro. Dorothy, I have a question for you in thinking about some of this criteria and trying to assess when to move on a vessel compared to another. How does this help address any of the vessels that are community concerns, potential environmental concerns, but maybe in a section of water that may not be under direct DSL control or responsibility or DEQ or any other state agency. Does this help kind of address that sort of challenge at all?
I think that will probably get discussed a lot more in the second part of this meeting. Because there are some considerations that DSL has to look at, like I said, from the DSL perspective in, fulfilling our duties to the state. And so if it is something that is not trespassing against the state, it's in an area where it's somebody else's responsibility, that is going to figure into how concerned DSL is. But that doesn't mean that it's not a really concerning vote. And so we would still be interested in finding out where it ranks based on all of those other things. If it's a huge environmental threat, it's a huge nuisance, it's incredibly volatile, 900 feet long. Obviously, we're going to have a level of concern about that, but it will rank somewhere on the list with the other ones that we're concerned about. But I think the next part of the meeting is going to be a conversation about those allocations and how we can help with the proper response to a vessel that somebody else is very concerned about also.
Thank you. All right, that's Chris.
Hey, Chris Hathaway, Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership. And yeah, I also really like the criteria, Dorothy. The one question I had is, you say it a number of times, if I hear about it, if DSL learns about it, a lot of that transmission of information from somebody out in the field to you back in Salem seems unclear how that actually would happen. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit. Maybe you're just so plugged in that that it just naturally happens, but it seems like there's not a process really to ensure that that happens.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Chris. We are currently constructing a more robust, consistent method of receiving reports. We receive reports right now. You can go to our website and you can report a vessel that you're concerned about. And to some extent, you're right. We are plugged in enough and we've established relationships through this work group and other networking to where I do feel like we hear about quite a bit and we proactively, seek that information. I was hoping that I would have more to be able to show you today about what I'm picturing for a reporting system that puts the vessel in the geospatial context and also in the context of some of those map layers that I alluded to, like the essential salmonid habitat. So that eventually what we want to have is a two-way method of communication between Oregonians letting us know about boats they're concerned about, and then us letting them know that we know, and this is how it stacks up with everything else that we're being asked to look at right now. So I apologize that we're not farther along on that to be able to show you something today, but that hasn't been overlooked.
Thank you both. Any other questions or comments? Alan,
I think to back up Dorothy,
if you can introduce
Sorry.
yourself. Thank you.
Alan Hansen with the Oregon State Marine Board. To back up Dorothy, the Oregon State Marine Board works with a significant number of law enforcement agencies. And so there has been a history when law enforcement is concerned about a vessel, they will contact the Marine Board. So, and we've been in fairly close contact with DSL. So we do have, a baseline communication system set up. So we're not starting from zero in that respect.
Thank you. All right. Troy.
Yeah, sorry for the interruption, but here in Washington, we get reports from everybody. I mean, we get reports from citizens, visitors from other states, uh, police departments, sheriff's departments, fire departments, cities, workers. We get reports from anyone who has anything to do with a boat or seen a boat in their lifetime. The hard part, the hard part is discerning the real reports from the fake reports. So, yeah, you're going to get flooded as soon as you publicize the reporting method of your choice. But we get reports, email, phone calls. We even have an app on our website that you can use on your phone to make a report. I don't think the actual reporting is going to be an issue. It's going to be how you deal with that report afterwards.
Yeah, thanks, Troy.
Thanks, Troy. It's always great to hear your experience in Washington. That's been really helpful in this process.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Josh.
I never miss a good opportunity to give a counter question to Troy. So Troy, I appreciate that insight. Do you have any suggestions for or advice for dealing with that reporting system and for sorting through that data, for lack of a better way to say it?
Yes. So the first thing that we do is we determine whether or not it meets abandoned or derelict, the definition of abandoned or derelict. And that dictates whether it moves into the program or if it just moves into, oh, that's nice to know folder. So we can keep track of what's what. So once we determine that it meets the definition of abandoned and derelict, then we have to do what Dorothy's been talking about. We have to categorize its threat to human safety and the environment and give it a removal priority. Normally we do that through either contacting the reporting party and asking for photos or the exact location so we can send someone out to do reconnaissance on the vessel. And that way we can get information to make that call on the removal priority. A lot of the times the reports come in with pictures already and GPS coordinates and stuff like that because they're repeat customers. They keep sending in reports and stuff like that so they know what to expect. So we can make those determinations based off of its location as well as the pictures from the reporting party. So yeah, it's we don't have a set system as you have to do A, B, C, and D. All we have to do is determine whether it meets the definition of abandoned and derelict. If it does, we give it a DVRP tracking number and everything starts from there.
Great. Thank you, Troy, again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Anyone else? Sergeant.
Go ahead, Josh.
I know that someone said something in the chat. I just don't want to make sure that we lose that.
Abby just wanted to comment to include the ORES, Oregon Emergency Response System, if you don't already have that as your data input. So
Thank you, Kate.
Awesome. Steve Dangler.
Thanks for calling that out. I can't see the chat from where I'm at, so. What is the website to report ADVs?
yeah, I added it to the chat, but it's on our website. If you navigate to the waterways, there's a subpage for ADVs, and you'll see a list of 3 approaches to report an ADV depending on levels of threat. But we do have a form that that the ADV team is reviewing.
Thank you.
And Willie, I did receive the form that you submitted over the weekend, and we'll be adding that to our list. So thank you for your concern and thank you for utilizing that resource already.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, Sergeant, back to you.
Yeah, Steve Dangler, Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. I think as this continues to move forward, that prioritization is going to be just absolutely imperative. So the criteria that's been listed, I think, is a great starting point in that process, especially when we're dealing with statewide ADV issues.
Thank you. Josh? You have to use the microphone with the outside noise.
Yeah, I didn't know it was leaf blower day. Since we have a few minutes left until our break, I think we've exhausted the questions that the group had. Well, never mind. Mr. Landauer has one. But if there's anything that felt blatantly missed or overlooked, this is also an opportunity to bring that to our attention. So I just wanted to put that out there. But go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, sorry to ruin your pathway there, Josh. Dorothy, I'm really impressed with the criteria, and want to thank you for your work on that. Obviously, you put a great deal of thought, and your experience in this area showed through with that. I guess my question, though, is, and I didn't necessarily see it in your categorization, but also, well, I guess it was. I just want to be sure that it was there, that any vessels that are posing a threat to navigation needs to be dealt with immediately. And I assume that that is a part of the criteria, but I want to make sure, because I do know that when vessels either accidentally break loose or potentially intentionally get loose and are in the navigation channel, that causes all kinds of problems with the maritime industry. And so I just wanted to check in with you to make sure that that is a consideration. I'm sure that it is, but I just want to make sure that I have that clear in my mind. So thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Mark. That would fall under the volatility rating. And I guess I failed to say that a boat that's like actively on the loose moving would probably get a real high volatility rating. And I think we still have some more work to do to assess the weight that each one of those would receive. But obviously, if a vessel is posing a threat to navigation, then it's going to naturally score pretty high on a lot of those ratings. And so that would receive a pretty high level of concern.
Thank you, Dorothy. Josh, did you have?
Yeah, I just, as we continue to Dorothy brought up the weights, and it reminded me of something. Conversations that we're continuing to have is something that is incredibly high in terms of volatility in the situation was just described. Environmental threat, something that is an environmental catastrophe, something that poses just a crazy nuisance. A very high score in any one of those categories can raise the level of concern above and beyond just the cumulative looking at that all four of those. So I just want to make sure that that's out there. We purposely didn't use some numbers associated with this presentation because look, these are all the considerations that go in. But again, in that example of the boat flowing down the river, hitting bridge pilings along the way, its level of concern in one category may result in response outside of maybe what the other categories dictate. So I just want to kind of let you all into that part of the conversation as well.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. Stan?
Hi, Stan Tonneson with Rocky Point Marina and a member of WOO. I also like the rating system. It's well done. Dorothy, you did a good job. My thought was, or just want to throw this out as an idea, we know that getting the equipment to a location is a big part of the cost. What would happen if all these non-volatile boats, 3 or 4 within a big project, it makes fantastic financial sense to have those removed at the same time. And I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, thank you. So I tried to emphasize that the ranking that a vessel receives isn't, directly connected to the decision making around the response for it. So absolutely, there's flexibility in there if we decide that one vessel that ranks very high for us that we're very concerned about, and so we're going to commit to an actual expenditure response on that one, then we'll definitely have conversations about what's the most responsible use of funds and what's efficient and what can we get the most benefit from. So yeah, that's something that has been in the back of my mind because Troy Wood has brought that up several times, that maybe they're dealing with a high priority vessel and there are some very low priority vessels in the area. And so, you know, they can make the business decision to go and deal with all of those at once. So we're definitely anticipating those types of conversations.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you. And that's an excellent point, Stan, with regard to economies of scale. Troy?
Yeah, sorry to chime in again, but I deal with a lot of these reports where they expect me to go out there and get this boat today because it's such a high priority and stuff like that. And they expect us to be the first responders to the situation. And I think you guys should get ahead of that game and make it known that yes, you have a priority scheme, but you're not a first responder. You're going to be the last responders. You're the trash pickup. You're the ones going out there to pick up the trash off the beach. And so when they call to you to report these vessels, they should understand that if it's an emergency, they should call 911. If they're calling just to report the vessel, then that's appropriate. Because you're obviously not setting yourselves up to the first responders.
Great. Thank you again, Troy. Okay, well, I think we have hit the break point. So if we want to take a 5-minute bio break and then reconvene at 2:05, we'll do that. Thank you.
Those that might not have been here before, the bathrooms are right around the lobby on the left hand side. Yeah, it is.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. And we've got a couple more topics that we want to go through here. But I'm going to ask for Josh to introduce the next one.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eric. So just as kind of a preface for the discussion coming up next, when Eric and I were preparing for this meeting last week, I had said, you know, we've had some very high level hypothetical conversations about what the program should prioritize in terms of allocating funds towards both now and in the future. We as a work group have, you know, we worked together, put together that framework that incorporated a whole bunch of potential components, or maybe needed components, or at least desired components of a holistic ADV program. And we identified a lot, and they were all good ideas. They were outside of a finite resource pool in many ways. And so since with the work group ending, and with a lot of the work here at DSL just beginning, I asked Eric to facilitate a discussion into you know, suggestions for how we should allocate the resources that we have, because they are indeed very, very finite. We can't run $100 million vessel turn-in program, despite whether that's needed in the state or not. That's just not the reality. So I wanted to revisit the conversation that we had regarding funding and putting different amounts of money, different percentages of overall program budget into different pots, and just see what that looks like now if we are talking about, you know, a more discrete pot. So that's really it, Eric. That's the conversation I'd like to see the group have. I think there should be some differing opinions kind of on this, because as Dorothy said at the onset of this, we all have some different perspectives regarding, you know, what our priorities are, what our obligations are. So Eric, I think that's enough of a caption for this discussion. But that's what we were looking to facilitate. So go ahead.
Great, thank you very much. I want to put a chart here in front of the group, and I'm trying to figure out for the folks online if there's a good way to do this. But if those of you that are back here want to scoot over there, you can see if you want. But hopefully those of you that are online can see this pie chart. So what we had a conversation, Josh and Dorothy and I had a conversation last week about, what were the different categories of potential places that the funds could be used, the limited funds, but the funds nonetheless. And so there were 5 different areas that came up in the discussion. One is just DSL and the work that DSL is obligated and tasked with doing. The other is ports, the private marinas, local government assistance, and citizen vessel turn-in program. These were the 5 that came up. Josh, do you want to talk about these real quick?
I don't think that we need to talk about any of them in detail. They should be, and they're fairly self-explanatory. I think for the people on online, just the graphic that I'm looking at right now is a 6-piece pie chart with those categories that Eric just described. Equal kind of a hypothetical breakdown of ADV removal and assistance funds. And it's nothing more than a hypothetical. What do you think about this? What pieces need to be bigger, smaller, the whole pie, non-existent? And I want to again preface all this with this doesn't necessarily dictate how the rest of our biennial budget for this biennium, what the next biennium looks like. But again, the last work group meeting, like we would like to get some of those perspectives, not only to inform what we do now, but also how we talk to legislators, talk to other officials, talk to potential grantors. When they say what are the needs in Oregon, and we can say, well, given some of the conversations that we've had, there are a lot of folks that would like to see money put here or money allocated for this. So it's not just a singular exercise in determining a budget. It informs other decisions going forward.
Great. Thank you, Josh. So the first question, I mean, given the pie chart that's being shown here with these 5 different categories, my first question to you is there anything that's missing from this pie chart that ought to be under consideration as one of the areas for funding?
When we talk.
Prevention.
I'm sorry, who was that?
I'm sorry. It's Mark Landauer. I see that you have vessel, and I'm sorry, I'm with the Oregon Public Ports Association, so obviously I'd love to see the port slice much bigger, but I understand that's not the question. I do see the vessel turn-in, which is, I think, a component of prevention, but I really believe that a part of that pie needs to be prevention as a part of this whole strategy moving forward. And I think that just the comment, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If you monetize that, it's very different from taking a vessel off the surface of the water or off a bank versus one that has completely gone underwater. So I just think that component needs to be emphasized. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And just want to point out very quickly here that the size of the slices of the pie are not representative of what they would be. This was just for a demonstration of the different categories. So, Josh?
Yeah, Mark, a follow-up, if I may. So a lot of our, I don't want to call them administrative tasks. That's not necessarily true. Our other day-to-day stuff that is not putting money towards vessels. I think there's a giant focus in the realm of prevention. You kind of answered my question actually with the end of your comment was, what does allocating money look like in that prevention realm? And I think you're describing it as proactive response, potential removal prior to situations getting worse. That's what you're alluding to there?
I think so. It's I think of an example at the Port of Garibaldi where we had I think, and I'm sorry, I can't speak for Mike Sadin, but, he had a vessel, 60-foot vessel in his marina. They knew that I think that they knew that the pumps weren't necessarily terribly trustworthy, and of course the whole thing went down in the middle of the night, and the result of that was a $500,000 bill versus potentially getting that vessel out before it actually sunk. So I realized that there are a lot of demands on limited dollars, but I also feel that in the long run you can potentially save money by preventing some of these from becoming worse. That's really my point here, Josh. And I just didn't, I see these pie slices, and I just didn't see anything that, obviously vessel turn-in is a component of it, but again, the other thing I would just say is, those are sort of the potential stakeholder groups, at least DSL ports, private marinas, local government assistance. But I also think that there's an enforcement component. I think that there's, as I mentioned, a prevention component. So I'm a little perhaps bit confused by the pie chart, but wanted to share sort of those thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, and if I may respond to at least part of that. Now, you're certainly correct. Enforcement is not represented on what we have here in the room, and whether it should be or not, I think is a continuing point of conversation. In the way that you described preventative efforts for vessels becoming a situation, addressing them before they become worse. That is, at least in my mind, the idea behind some of these other buckets or pie slices, regarding ports, private marinas, local government assistance, just providing an avenue to tap into resources, maybe financial, maybe not, but to tap into resources to address their problems as they see them before they get worse. So in your example, I would have had that captured in the ports part of the pie, as just in having an avenue for them to access resources to deal with their problems.
Great. Thank you, Josh. Kate, do we have something in the chat?
Yeah, we have a couple comments online. Just a question about whether vessels on the ocean shore, where that kind of fits into the pie chart, and whether that falls under DSL or other kind of state agency partners. So I have that one, and then I have another when you're ready.
Let's go to the first one first. And Josh, do you have a?
Yeah,
that?
that one's certainly in our mind, typically under local government assistance. And you could even take out local in that and just it's assisting other jurisdictions, assisting other governments, whether it's county, city. In the case of the ocean shore, state parks, it's, vessels that aren't necessarily affecting Department of State lands now. It could be DSL lands, at some point in the future, but those that have responsibilities on the water. So we certainly see that as being represented here, and something that we've heard is a desire for the program to assist with.
Great. Thank you, Josh. And there's one more, and then we're going to go to Sergeant Dangler.
The other question was the time frame of the funding. So the funding that we currently have and how that fits into the time frame.
Sure. I mean, I think we can have a pretty candid conversation about that. The 18 million and change seed money for this program, most of that is still available to us. Although as we start to look at what vessels fit pretty high in the ranking system, as was previewed earlier, we are prepared to start utilizing some of those funds. Those funds don't have any end date associated with them. They exist in perpetuity, but that was a one-time allocation. And anything going forward, whether it's asked of the legislature, for a general fund ask or a funding stream, those are things that we had talked about at previous meetings. Certainly we're gearing up for federal grant cycles. But right now, the funding reality is there is that single pot that, yes, exists, but nothing else is supporting that ADV fund in the treasury until actions probably brought forward, at least in part, by this program.
Thank you. Let's move to Sergeant Dangler.
Thanks, Steve Dangler, Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. I'd like to highlight a couple of points here. I know we've talked about this categorization in prior meetings, but the private marinas, local government assistance, and the ports are extremely valuable in that they have the assets and the local government support to, be able to assist in the management of what is occurring as far as what needs to happen, the efforts moving forward, where that is not going to have to be directly managed by Department of State Lands, where something like the Citizens Vessel Turn-In Program and prevention, which I completely 110% support, those are things that are going to have to be managed directly by DSL program staff. So just like I said, to highlight the three most important ones on there, because they have the resources and the staff to be those eyes and ears out in the field to help facilitate this progress forward. With that, under those three categories, you could list out probably dozens of local entities in and around those areas that could provide assistance and help manage this program as it goes forward.
Thank you, Sergeant. We're going to go to Troy, and then we have another comment in the chat. Troy?
Hi. Have you guys thought of cost sharing? When we first started, we only reimbursed authorized public entities 90% of their costs for removing the vessels, but that included in-kind costs and stuff too. So if they had free labor, they could include that labor cost, in other words. The other thing is, don't forget about the federal agencies like the Coast Guard or even your own other state agencies like DEQ. Because when you're responding to these vessels and removing them and stuff, they have access to the Oil Liability Trust Fund, and they can remove a lot of the hazardous materials off of those vessels prior to you taking them. And that will reduce your burden in taking those vessels and stuff too. So getting a good partnership with the federal agencies is probably really important moving forward. Right now, I'm dealing with one vessel that is sunk on state-owned aquatic lands. The Coast Guard agreed to raise it and pump all the petroleum off of it, and then they're going to hand it to us, and we're going to take it from there. So they pay for the raising and the removal of the hazardous materials, but then we eventually get handed off with the vessel. So just some things to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a chat comment, right? No, we don't. Oh, sorry. I saw your name tag up. Josh, did you have something?
Just to follow up to Troy's initial question, yes, we absolutely have considered the idea of, oh yeah, so my name tag's been up like the whole time. No, we absolutely have considered the cost sharing, and as we explore that what reimbursement / granting, what that looks like, and also if in the short term it makes sense for funds to be set aside for that, especially considering the relatively low dollar amounts that unfortunately ADVs, big ADVs especially are an expensive endeavor, right? So if we do put funds aside for local assistance ports, I think we'll have to have a realistic conversation about how much should DSL cover as part of any project, or should there be some sort of cost share? Because a cost share program also takes into account local priorities, right? If this is something that a local government is willing to contribute funds towards, it indicates to us that yes, this is indeed a local priority that we should look at closely and help and potentially help with.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so looks like everybody's questions and concerns and comments have been answered. Could that really be? All right, Troy.
Sorry about that. So have you thought about putting money towards prevention? I know you broke it up in by agencies and stuff like that, but and I know someone else mentioned prevention as well. I'm sure you have prevention under your DSL pie slice, but outreach, education. You might want to put funds towards that. That might help prevent some of these vessels from becoming abandoned and derelict.
Josh?
Yeah, Troy, it's a good point. When we were talking of, putting together the framework for this discussion, it was how many of the administrative, and again, I don't know if that's the best word, but these administrative responsibilities that we're committing to. I mean, the things in the framework that we talked about being important: outreach and education, some preventative efforts, and that preventative efforts and outreach and education in some ways go hand in hand. Certainly, we have our eyes on prevention when we look at our legislative concept, development. Some of the other things that we'd like to change, these areas where we'd like to affect change. So yes, they are on the radar. They are part of the plans. They're not necessarily in the here is where money is going directly towards vessels conversation, which was kind of the idea for now.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? All right, let me just ask one more question with regard to the pie chart here. Is there anything on this pie chart? Well, pretty much everything's been identified as having some level of priority by at least some of you. But let me just focus in because we haven't had a whole lot of discussion about this, on the citizen vessel turn-in program. And is there a thought that it is part of this pie? And if so, where does it sort of fit in the hierarchy of priority? Sergeant Dangler.
Yeah, Steve Dangler. Steve Dangler, Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. I think that falls in with prevention as well as underneath that DSL section here. I think it's extremely important in that again, it's just going to help alleviate problems from hitting our waterways. I know it's a free outlet for people to get rid of things, and should we as taxpayers, should the state be funding that and paying for that? But then on the flip side, I've seen what happens on the other end and what that actual cost is now to taxpayers in the state when it comes to cleanup time. But it is extremely important as a preventative measure to help alleviate some of the issues that we've all seen on our waterways. And I think it should take high priority.
But I believe you were the one who highlighted the 3 here, right?
Correct.
And so where does that fall for you in terms of those other 3?
So the 3 that were highlighted there were highlighted in the sense that Department of State Lands has stakeholders and local, federal governments, organizations, businesses as their eyes and ears out in the field and can do some of the work. The reason why that wasn't highlighted is because this is going to be work that directly falls under the program of Department of State Lands and their management team. We had a partnership last year between Multnomah County, OSMB, and Metro in a turn-in program that was very successful for the Metro regional area. That being said, it takes a lot of work to pull that off and keep that going and sustain a prevention program and turn-in program. And again, that would have to fall under somebody specific who is going to take charge of that, i.e., my guess would be Department of State Lands.
Okay, so that there is some in your mind somewhat inherent here, but at the same time, with it being sort of a I don't want to necessarily couch it as optional, but I mean, in terms of the mission of DSL and what DSL has to do, um, this is sort of an add-on, if you will, to DSL's work, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Like I said, there are folks out there in the ports, the private sector, as well as local, federal, state government. Um, they can assist DSL. This would be something that DSL would have to operate.
Okay. Josh, did you have any thoughts about that?
Nothing other than I agree with Sergeant Dangler. That vessel turn-in programs can be resource intensive to manage. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I think we are aware of that, and that's a consideration. And it's also interesting to think about the idea of a vessel turn-in program beside these other typically larger vessels that we are saying are very high on our vessel of concern list. And that's why we wanted to have this discussion. Like, we've identified as this group, we think all these things are important. Figuring out which ones are more important, which initiatives are more important, not just each vessel, but which ones are more important based on $5 million or $50 million in a year. I mean, these are some of the challenges going forward, and I think we will continue to seek input from the public outside of this work group process. But we will continue to seek input to refine our priorities and further determine the priorities of Oregonians.
Great, thank you. Chief Whalen?
Sean Whalen, Portland Fire. And I also just wanted to kind of second what Sergeant Dangler said, in that the vessel turn-in program, I know it can be seen as it's a little bit of a giveaway maybe to citizens at taxpayer expense. But at the same time, the cost maybe of not doing it is worse than just the benefit. And beyond that, and I know it's even been a different kind of giveaway, but I go to pretty much all the marinas in Portland every year, and they all have some vessels that got there different ways that they couldn't take advantage of the vessel turn-in program. And maybe it's an opportunity to look at maybe not 100% vessel turn-in, but find a way where the marinas can utilize that program, because some of the vessels they get are vessels that floated into their marina, not really their fault. Others are maybe non-rent payers or whatnot. Maybe, whatever the decisions are, how they got there are different. But even if it's looking at then a cost share of some sort, rather than having them get rid of them and being somebody's live aboard boat that then we are dealing with 2 or 3 or 5 years later for 10 times the cost.
Great, thank you. Alan, then we're going to go to Troy.
Thank you. Alan Hansen, Oregon State Marine Board. One of the questions I had with the turn-in program is I've seen lots of, this past session, there was some legislation to have an RV turn-in program. And do we distinguish between a boat on a trailer versus a boat on the water? I mean, in my thought process here, if it's on a trailer, it's not necessarily as big of a concern for this program, but it could be included in the definition of a recreational vehicle. And so maybe if it's a trailer boat, it goes in that stream. If it's on the water, then it would be part of this program.
So your emphasis is if it's in the water, that's where the priority comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, great. Troy, I believe you were next.
Thank you, sir. To speak to the last speaker's point, vessels on trailers are high risk too, because normally the trailers are worth more than the boats. And so what we find is they take it to a DFW boat launch, they launch the boat and drive away with the trailer, and then we're left with the boat. So our vessel turn-in program will accept both the boat and the trailer for that reason, because we do consider them to be still a threat. Maybe not as high as the ones that are floating on the water, but they're still a threat to the environment. Yes, so as far as the turn-in program, you can share costs with the owners. What we do is we ask them to remove all the fuel, trash, and stuff like that before they bring it to a location that we specify. And that's another way to share that cost. So you can set up a disposal site, as it were, or you can just meet them at the dump and pay for the weight ticket. We've done that before too. There are ways that you can share costs with these owners that will reduce the cost to you and to the taxpayers of Oregon.
Thank you, Troy. All right, Chris.
Yeah, Chris Hathaway, the Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership, regarding the vessel turn-in program. I mean, to me, it's like, I think it makes sense for DSL to have a framework, but for everybody to be a part of the vessel turn-in program in some ways. I mean, it may make a lot more sense for somebody to turn in a vessel to a port than it would be to turn in a vessel to, you know, a DSL. You know, DSL may not have a place to turn for somebody to turn something in Coos Bay, for example. To me, it seems like, and Metro's been running this program, it seems like all the different local entities may have a role in terms of making it easy to turn vessels in within a framework that DSL establishes. And I like Troy's idea of having definitely an upper limit on the size of the boat that you can turn in. I think that really makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. Josh, did I see you reach for the microphone? I did not. Okay. Dorothy.
Yeah, so we're kind of trying to talk about what percentage maybe ought to be allocated for a citizen vessel turn-in program. And we're starting to get into debating the details of the program. But I'm curious if the specific details of the program affect people's opinion on the allocation. So, like, are there folks out there who would say, well, I think that 20% of the money ought to go to vessel turn-in, but only if you make the owner cost share. If you don't make the owner cost share, then I only want 10% of the allocation going to that. Or, yeah, I think it ought to be 30% of the program, but only boats over 50 feet. And if you take boats under 50 feet, then I wouldn't want you to put that much money toward it. So I'm kind of curious how people feel about whether the details of the program influence how much of the pie it should get.
Quick question. It looks like Sergeant Dangler is ready to respond.
Just an additional follow-up on that. And Troy, this might be something that you might have an answer to. When we talk about the ownership piece of it and them paying, can we do it at like a size limit, like 30 feet? Any, we have the cap of 30 feet. Anything 30 feet and above is a cost share with the owner. Does anybody do that now?
Kind of. So when our vessel turn-in program first started, we allocated only $200,000 per biennium to the program, and the vessels had to be below 45 feet. That afforded us the ability to remove about 60 to 70 vessels in about 12 months, and then we ran out of funds. So when we removed the cap, last biennium, we spent a little less than $400,000 on the vessel turn-in program, and we brought in close to 200 vessels. So how much you want to spend will dictate how many vessels that you can remove and stuff. So yeah, we removed the cap because we saw that getting those vessels out of the system prior to them becoming abandoned and derelict was well worth it, because when they're turned into the vessel turn-in program, our costs were below $4,000, $3,000 per vessel. Whereas if you had to go out and get it, you're spending a minimum $15,000, $25,000 on that vessel. So that the cost of going out and getting one vessel, you could have disposed of 4 or 5 other vessels in the vessel turn-in program. And that's why we removed the cap, and we're seeing a larger participation in that. And we do share costs with the owners. We just had a turn-in event in the San Juan Islands where we took in 12 vessels from surrounding islands and stuff, but we asked the owners to get the boats there. We asked them to take all the trash and stuff off of it, and it was crushed in the boat yard that they brought it to and stuck in yard bins. And so we lowered our costs by bundling, as well as asking them to remove a lot of the hazardous materials that we could not handle at that boatyard.
Great. Thank you, Troy. Once again, some great examples of your real life experience there. Okay, any other comments before we move on? All right. So we are at a point where we're going to move on and talk about how to engage the community and the stakeholders going forward after this group sunsets. And what I'd like you to do, because we are close to the point of getting community input first, what I'd like to do is if you could just jot down a few notes right now of your ideas of how you would like to see the stakeholders for the ADV program be continually involved. That would be great. And I'm going to segue over to the community input portion, and then we will circle back. So, okay. So, we're a couple minutes early on the schedule, but I'm hoping that will be okay. All right. Do you have the slide for the community input? So for those of you who are not on the work group, who are either online or here in the room, this is your opportunity to share any thoughts that you might have or ask any questions of DSL. And what we're going to ask is that you, if you're online, raise your virtual hand. If you are here in the room, just raise your hand. And we will call on you in the order that the hand goes up. So we do ask that you identify yourself and what organization or interest that you represent, and that you limit your comments to 2 minutes. So with that, looks like we have one person online. Willie, please go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you. I actually came for the sole purpose today to just offer my respects to retiring Sergeant Dangler, a guy who brings excellence to his job, and it's an extremely hard job, just leading with heart and getting results. So I came in late, but just in case Sergeant Dangler has not been acknowledged, Sergeant Dangler, you're the man, and you will be missed. You're irreplaceable. Hopefully you're still on the line. That's number one. Number two, I just wanted to put a shout out.
Can you identify yourself so Sergeant Dangler knows who's congratulating him?
Certainly.
I know Willie.
Yes,
Willie. I'm still here.
We want to know.
Good. Okay, Willie Levinson, Human Access Project. I'm based in Portland.
Great,
and then I also wanted to make a comment regarding, at some point we're going to run out of funds, no matter how many funds we have. And the question is, how can we shape the culture? And I'm going to talk specifically in Portland. I don't know if this is something that can be done without additional legislation. I'd be interested in Sergeant Dangler's feedback on this. But when I look at the homeless boaters that are out there and potential boats that are going to sink, I think, number one, if they're licensed, if they take care of their bilge properly, if they're law abiding, I kind of don't care if they're there, because the problem is that we're never going to solve this. We only can hope to manage it. So the question is, how can we manage this? If there's a priority for current boats on the water, that if you're not properly licensed, you're going to be first to be removed. If you are not dealing with your bilge properly, if you're polluting, you are going to be first to be removed. If you are being unlawful, you are going to be first to be removed. But identifying a checklist of things, behavior that we want to shape, and these boaters will talk to each other. They'll say, hey, if you don't have a registered boat, they're going to go after you. And I imagine a lot of these boats couldn't even be registered because they're not up to certain protocol. So I don't really know legislatively how that can be done. But in terms of a longer term effect and shaping long-term culture about boaters feeling like there will be a consequence, I would love to see that happen. Thank you very much. And even though I did come for Sergeant Dangler, I stuck around because this group does awesome work and I just love listening to hear all the contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, Willie. Appreciate your comments. All right. Anyone else? So,
I can respond a little bit to Willie.
oh, no, please go ahead.
So I'm Steve Dangler, Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. You had a question about the effort, and it's actually thanks to everybody in this room and online that have joined us today that have helped make the effort possible over the last several years. Our numbers at the highest point in the Multnomah County area, 110 miles of waterway, was 176 abandoned derelict vessels. We now have that down to 96, and where that may not seem like a huge jump in numbers, it's actually the credit of everybody involved from day one, working day in and day out. Supporting us, working on that funding, because each vessel that we pulled off the water, we had another one or two show up. So we have been working tirelessly in and around our area to make some of those improvements occur. And again, that is thanks to everybody that is in this work group today. It wouldn't be possible without everybody's input, everybody's support, and everybody coming together. Which is why this new group with the Department of State Lands is so important. It is taking what has been started and turning it statewide. So we are working through that, and I think there's a bright future ahead of us.
Thank you, Sergeant, and congratulations.
Thanks.
All right. Anyone here in the audience? No? Okay. We're going to move on to the next agenda item. And I asked you before we got started with the community input, just to jot down some ideas of how you think the stakeholders or community groups that are interested in this program should be engaged going forward. So any volunteers? Alan.
Alan Hanson, Oregon State Marine Board. So one of the programs we have is a Clean Marina program. And one of the conditions of that program is that the marinas make sure that all their vessels are currently registered. So I really appreciate Willie's comments. And DSL, while I wouldn't mandate that they have that their leaseholders participate in the Clean Marina program, but I think there is an opportunity to include in their leases some language that they're responsible for ensuring that registrations are maintained current, because I think that's correct that most vessels start the process of dereliction by not registering their vessel. And I mean, Dorothy and Josh were with the Oregon State Marine Board, so they have a lot more experience in that area than I do. But thank you.
Thank you. So going back to the question, how to keep people informed, how to keep people engaged in this program. Do you have any ideas?
And I can provide a little bit of a prompt. Like was said earlier, the charge for this work group has been met for this specific group of individuals. The work's done, but we certainly acknowledge that continued stakeholder and community engagement is a necessary component of the program going forward. I think I said that earlier as well. So our initial plans involve regional open forum type meetings where we bring program staff to ADV affected communities potentially, just to make sure that our priorities are aligning with those with local priorities. We also are looking for an avenue for public input on vessels of concern to inform our own level of concern, because making decisions about the vessel, the concern associated with the vessel, I don't want that to happen in a vacuum. And earlier, Deputy Director Ryan mentioned the public process is involved with rulemaking and the legislative process. And so there's going to be plenty of opportunities for you all to continue to participate with our work. support of the things that we try to bring forward through a legislative process will be absolutely critical in the success of those efforts. So I guess my discussion prompt for the rest of the afternoon, though, is what else? What else should we do to engage stakeholders, seek input, et cetera? I'm just genuinely interested in seeing what other suggestions you might have for us, even after we leave here today and finish the work group. But give us suggestions for how we should interact with the public, with stakeholders, with anyone interested. So it looks like I did enough to get at least one response. Thank you, Sergeant Dangler.
I'm here for you, Josh. All right. You know, that continued support is absolutely imperative for this program to move forward. We have several folks that have joined us today online from different organizations up and around the Portland metro area. Continued outreach to the yachting clubs, the different moorages. There's so many other folks out there that can be contacted, and like I said, the more support that this gets moving forward, the more successful we're going to be in the long run. So like I said, there's several others here from like the Human Access Project, Waterfront Organizations of Oregon, Columbia River Yachting Association. That doesn't include all the moorages and marinas up and around that area, and that's just the Portland area. You start compounding that to all of those that have interest in and around our waters, you know, statewide, and those numbers grow immensely. So it's making those contacts, reaching out, and gaining that support from folks statewide.
Great. Thank you, Sergeant. Anyone else?
Just wanted to add that Mark Lander added fishing guides and surf riders to.
What was that again?
Mark Landauer added fishing guides and surf riders to Surf Riders Foundation to the list of folks to be reaching out to.
And so the fishing guides, and sorry, I'm a little slow at the end of this meeting. What foundation? Surf Rider. Thank you.
Excuse me. Yeah, and I thank both Mark and Sergeant Dangler for those suggestions. I think there's some really good points in there, and just continuing to build our collective community that deals with this problem, sees this problem, in some ways is in a position to actually address this problem, and just build that community base, so that we can all collectively work on it together. So I appreciate both pieces of input, Mark and Sergeant Dangler.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Okay, well, I think we've gotten as far as we can on this topic, and if you have additional thoughts, I know that Josh and Dorothy and Kate would welcome any suggestions that you have after this meeting. So with that, I think that concludes the meeting. Before I pass it back to Josh, let me just say that I want to thank you all for allowing me to be your facilitator during this process. You have been an easy group to work with and made my job very easy. So thank you for that. And I've also learned a lot about ADVs in the process. So, but thank you very much. And I'm going to turn it back to Josh.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think there's a lot more additional I have to say, other than I appreciate the willingness of everyone to provide a good, positive, supportive environment for these meetings to happen in. Like it's sometimes difficult to attain in any kind of work group or task force or whatever. So I will, for the 100th time in the last 6 months, just extend my sincere thank you to those that participated in these meetings. And then I'll end with, I'm not hard to get a hold of, whether it's phone or by email. And we are, just because this work group meeting ends today. That does not mean we are done seeking input from any of you all or others maybe listening. So please do not hesitate to reach out with suggestions, concerns, criticisms. I'm here for it all. So we want to make sure this program is transparent. And we're committed to that. So again, thank you. And that can end our meeting. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.